Why are you sitting with my son?" Elizabeth Carter's sharp voice cut through the quiet hallway of her $35 million estate. At 40 years old and heir to a tech fortune, she stared with disapproval at the scene in front of her. A woman in a gray uniform sitting on the carpet next to her 8-year-old son, Daniel. Maria Rodriguez, 36, slowly stood up and picked up her cleaning bucket. She had been working in this house for 4 months, staying quiet and out of sight. Nobody knew that she had been a language teacher at 2 colleges before her world fell apart, and she had to take any job she could find to pay for her father's hospital bills. "I apologize, Mrs. Carter. I was only—" "You were only what?" Elizabeth interrupted, her expensive shoes clicking loudly as she walked closer. "Daniel hasn't said a single word in 3 years. Not one. And now I find you here, doing— what exactly?" Daniel stayed sitting on the floor holding a picture book with colorful images. His brown eyes were bright in a way Maria knew well. This wasn't a child who couldn't learn. This was a smart boy waiting for someone to understand him. "I was cleaning the library and he walked over to me," Maria said, which was partly true. The real truth was that over the past few weeks, she had noticed how Daniel reacted when she quietly spoke different languages while dusting or organizing. First French, then Portuguese, until 2 days ago when he whispered his first sound in years. "Hola." Elizabeth grabbed the book from her son's hands. "A Spanish storybook. Where did this come from?" "From your library, ma'am. I was putting books back in order." "And you thought you could test things on my son?" Elizabeth's face turned red with anger. "He has severe autism. Multiple doctors have said he will never speak. He doesn't connect with anyone. He doesn't learn normally." Maria felt something burning inside her chest. Not anger, but understanding. She had seen this same situation with many children who were called hopeless by people who didn't look deep enough. "With respect, Mrs. Carter," Maria said, keeping her voice steady and calm. "Sometimes children just need someone to speak their language." Elizabeth laughed in a mean way. "You're a housekeeper giving me advice about my own child? About a boy you've barely known for 4 months?" "It's not advice," Maria replied, kneeling beside Daniel again. "It's just another way of seeing things." That's when it happened. Daniel looked up, made eye contact with Maria, and said something that made Elizabeth freeze in shock. "Bonjour, madame." The silence felt heavy. Elizabeth blinked over and over as if she couldn't trust what she just heard. He spoke, in French. Maria nodded, her eyes showing quiet joy. "Children like Daniel aren't broken, Mrs. Carter. They communicate differently than most people expect." Elizabeth looked at her son, then at Maria, then back at Daniel, who was now turning pages in the Spanish book with real interest. For the first time in 3 years, there was something alive and curious in her boy's expression. "How did you know?" Elizabeth whispered, her pride disappearing for just a moment. Maria smiled softly. Not a proud smile, but the smile of someone who knows important secrets. "Let's just say I've been in similar situations before." Right there, in that cold hallway of a mansion where money could buy almost anything except understanding, a woman everyone ignored had just started something no one could have predicted. If you've ever been looked down on by someone who should have valued you, then you know that sometimes the best response is simply showing what you can do. The next morning, Elizabeth called Maria into her home office, where fancy awards and photos from charity events hung on the walls like prizes. "We need to talk about yesterday," Elizabeth said without asking Maria to sit. "What happened was just luck. Daniel makes random sounds sometimes. It doesn't mean anything real." Maria stood with her hands folded in front of her. "I understand, ma'am. I want you to stay away from him. No talking to him at all." Elizabeth paused, looking at Maria with growing dislike. "Actually, maybe you should only clean the basement and the staff areas from now on." My assistant Rebecca will handle the rooms where Daniel spends time. If she only knew, Maria thought. If she knew I have a doctorate in language studies from Boston University. I specialized in how special needs children learn multiple languages. I've written 20 research papers that other professors still use today. Of course, Mrs. Carter, just cleaning. But Elizabeth wasn't done. And let me be clear, she said, leaning back in her leather chair with a cruel smile. I hope yesterday didn't give you false hope. Daniel is severely autistic. 5 of the country's best specialists have confirmed this. He won't get better. He won't speak normally. He won't live an independent life. Each word was meant to hurt, but Maria kept her face calm. Inside, she remembered the 50 children she had worked with before. The kids everyone said would never improve, who now attended regular schools, spoke several languages, and lived happy lives. I understand your worry, ma'am. Worry? Elizabeth laughed. This isn't a worry. This is reality, and I don't want my son used as a science project by unqualified people. That afternoon, while organizing supplies in the storage room, Maria heard footsteps. It was Dr. Lisa Park, the family's private doctor, coming downstairs looking thoughtful. Sorry to interrupt, she said, checking to make sure they were alone. I need to talk about Daniel. Maria stopped working. Is something wrong? No, the opposite. Yesterday, when I heard him speak French, that was the first time in 3 years he said anything on his own. I've been a pediatrician for 25 years. I know the difference between real communication and random noise. Dr. Park moved closer and lowered her voice. Do you have training in special education? For a moment, Maria wasn't sure what to say. The truth could change everything, or destroy everything. She looked at the doctor's face, trying to decide if she could be trusted. Dr. Park, what if I told you I have a doctorate in language studies and spent 6 years specializing in how children with special needs develop? What would you do with that information? The silence felt full of possibilities. Dr. Park's eyes went wide. You have a doctorate? From where? Boston University. My research was about multilingualism in children on the autism spectrum. I've published 20 papers in academic journals. My God. She sat down on a storage box. What is someone with a PhD doing working as a housekeeper? Maria took a deep breath. Life happens, doctor. I lost my teaching position when my father got cancer. I needed money immediately to pay for his treatment. That was 14 months ago. Dr. Park shook her head, processing this. And Daniel, can you help him? I don't just think so. I know I can. He's not as severely autistic as the diagnosis says. He shows some signs of being on the spectrum, yes. But mostly, he has what we call selective mutism mixed with sensory sensitivity. His mother has treated him like he's damaged, so he's shut down completely. How can you be sure? 50 similar cases, doctor. Over 6 years, I worked with 50 children with the same diagnosis. Today, 42 of them speak multiple languages fluently and live completely normal lives. Dr. Park was quiet for several long seconds. Daniel has an appointment with me next week. Elizabeth wants to increase his medications. She says he's getting worse and living in his own world. He's not getting worse. He's getting better. For the first time in 3 years, he's found a way to communicate that feels safe to him. I believe you. Dr. Park took out a business card. This is my personal cell phone. If you're willing to help this boy, I'll support your work medically. But we'll have to be careful and quiet about it. After she left, Maria stood alone holding the card. For the first time in many months, hope started growing in her heart. That night, while Elizabeth was at a fundraising dinner downtown, Maria did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She called her old university department. Professor Anderson, this is Maria Rodriguez. There was a long pause on the other end. Maria, where have you been? Your research was cited in 4 major journals last month. Stanford has been trying to reach you for 8 months. I've been dealing with family issues, but I need help. I need my research files, especially the protocols for selective mutism intervention. An hour later, Maria hung up feeling something she hadn't felt in forever. Real hope. Professor Anderson would quietly send her everything she needed to create a custom learning program for Daniel. But what she didn't know was that Rebecca, the assistant, had heard part of the phone conversation and would tell Elizabeth everything tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, in Daniel's bedroom, the boy looked at a book he'd found hidden under his pillow. A book about ocean animals with names in 7 different languages, which a certain former professor had left there on purpose. Fish, poisson, pescado, peixe, he whispered, each word sounding like beautiful music. Because sometimes the biggest changes don't start with arguments or fights, but with whispers in the dark, unexpected partnerships, and the patience of people who know that the strongest storms always come after the calmest moments. The next morning, Rebecca knocked on Elizabeth's office door with an expression mixing urgency and mean satisfaction. Mrs. Carter, I need to tell you something about Maria. Elizabeth looked up from her computer, already annoyed. What now? Last night I heard her on the phone talking about university research and academic papers. Rebecca paused for effect. She said something about being a doctor. Elizabeth blinked several times. A doctor? Maria? Yes, ma'am. And she mentioned something about 40 or 50 cases of children like Daniel. I think she's lying about who she really is to get close to him. Elizabeth's mind raced. A housekeeper who taught languages, who talked about research, who got Daniel to speak. The pieces started fitting together disturbingly. Bring her here now. 20 minutes later, Maria walked into the office and found Elizabeth standing behind her desk, with her laptop open, wearing an expression Maria had never seen before. Sit down, Elizabeth said coldly. Maria sat, keeping the calm appearance she had practiced for months. You lied to me. Elizabeth turned the laptop toward Maria. On the screen was a Boston University page showing Dr. Maria Rodriguez's academic profile with an impressive list of publications and awards. I never lied, Mrs. Carter. I simply didn't share information you never asked for. Never asked? Elizabeth slammed her hand on the desk. You let me believe you were just an uneducated housekeeper when this whole time you were a doctor specializing in autistic children. And why would that have mattered? Maria asked, her voice still calm. You made it very clear from day one that I was invisible. My job was to clean and stay silent. That people like me had nothing valuable to say. Elizabeth felt something uncomfortable twist in her stomach. That's different. You should have told me about your education. Why? So you could humiliate me in more creative ways? So you could tell me that even with a doctorate, I was still just hired help? That's when the door burst open and Daniel ran in, followed by Dr. Park. Maria! Maria! Daniel shouted in Portuguese, then switched to French. J'ai appris une chanson! Then to Italian. Posso cantare per te? Elizabeth stood frozen. Her son, who hadn't spoken in 3 years, had just switched smoothly between 3 languages in one breath. Dr. Park walked over calmly. Elizabeth, you need to see this. She put a tablet on the desk showing videos of Daniel from the past few weeks. Maria has been carefully recording Daniel's progress under my medical supervision. In the first video, Daniel counted to 10 in German. In the second, he said the alphabet in Japanese. In the third, he sang a nursery rhyme in Portuguese. 8 languages, Dr. Park continued. In 4 weeks, Daniel not only speaks, he understands complex grammar patterns. His thinking ability is exceptional. Elizabeth looked at her son, then at Maria, then at the videos playing on the screen. How is this possible? Because he was never severely autistic, Maria replied, standing up and kneeling beside Daniel. He had selective mutism caused by emotional trauma and isolation. When he found a safe space and a communication method that made sense to him, he naturally blossomed. Daniel turned to his mother, and for the first time in 3 years, looked directly into her eyes. "Mommy," he said in English, "Maria says I'm smart." Then he switched to Spanish. "Y ella tiene razón." Elizabeth felt tears filling her eyes. Her son, whom she had protected as if he were broken, was standing there speaking with a skill she'd never seen in children his age. "Daniel," she whispered, also kneeling. You could always talk?" "Yes, Mommy, but you always looked sad when I tried. So I stopped trying." He switched to French. "Mais Maria m'a compris." The silence that followed felt overwhelming. Elizabeth looked at Maria, who was watching her with an expression that wasn't victorious, but deeply sad. "I didn't know," Elizabeth said quietly. "I truly didn't know." "I know you didn't," Maria replied gently. "But now you do. The question is, what will you do with this knowledge?" Dr. Park put her hand on Elizabeth's shoulder. "Daniel needs to continue working with Maria. His progress is incredible, but stopping now would be devastating." Elizabeth watched her son, who was now playing with building blocks while counting in Mandarin, then looked at Maria, who had transformed her home without her even noticing. "I need to apologize," Elizabeth said, her voice breaking. "And I need to ask you to stay, not as a housekeeper, but as Daniel's teacher, as the person who gave me back my son." Maria smiled. Not a proud smile, but the smile of someone who finally sees a child being recognized for who he truly is. "I'll stay, but only on one condition. Daniel isn't a miracle or a success story. He's just a brilliant child who needs to be loved for who he is, not for what he can accomplish." As Elizabeth nodded, finally understanding, Daniel came over and took both women's hands. "Mommy Maria," he said in Portuguese, "are we a real family now?" Right there, in that moment, 3 lives changed forever, proving that sometimes the greatest changes don't happen in courtrooms or newspapers, but in the quiet moment when a child finally finds his voice and a mother learns to truly listen. 6 months later, the Carter estate had become completely different. What was once a silent, cold house is now filled with sounds of laughter, conversations in multiple languages, and most importantly, Daniel's cheerful voice echoing through every room. "Mom, I learned a new Swedish word today," Daniel shouted, running toward his mother, who was working on her laptop on the back patio. "Kärlek means love." Elizabeth smiled, a real smile that rarely appeared before. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Where's Dr. Rodriguez?" "She's recording another video for the channel," Daniel replied excitedly, switching to Spanish. "Hoy tenemos muchos estudiantes nuevos." The YouTube channel, Learning with Daniel, had become a worldwide success. In just 5 months, over 3 million people were watching Maria's lessons, where she taught language development techniques using Daniel as an inspiring example. Donations and educational partnerships had already raised over $800,000 for the foundation Elizabeth had created to support children with special needs. But the channel's success was just the beginning. Harvard, Yale, and Boston University were competing to hire Maria as a full professor. 4 publishers fought for the rights to her book, Breaking Through Silence: How Multiple Languages Unlock Special Minds, which became a bestseller before it even hit stores. "Dr. Rodriguez," Elizabeth said that afternoon, using the title she now said with pride. "The foundation has received 8 more requests from public schools wanting to use your methods." Maria, now wearing professional clothes that Elizabeth had happily bought for her, smiled while organizing teaching materials. 20 schools in 6 months. I never imagined we'd reach so many people." "And Rebecca?" Elizabeth asked, referring to the former assistant who had been let go after trying to sabotage Maria by spreading lies on social media. "I heard she's still job hunting," Maria replied without meanness. "Apparently, wealthy families don't hire people who gossip about their employers online. What goes around comes around." Dr. Park appeared on the patio carrying a thick folder. Ladies, I have amazing news. Your research paper has been accepted by the Journal of Child Psychology. Plus, the National Pediatric Association wants you to present your method at their annual conference. Elizabeth took a deep breath, watching her son playing in the yard, chatting fluently with a gardener in German. 6 months ago, she believed Daniel would never have a normal life. Today, he spoke better than most children his age. You know what surprises me most? Elizabeth said, turning to Maria. It's not just the languages or the academic success. It's that Daniel finally has light in his eyes. He's genuinely happy. Maria nodded. Children like Daniel don't need to be fixed, Elizabeth. They just need to be understood. That evening at dinner, Daniel made a special announcement. Mom, Dr. Maria, I wrote a thank you letter. Can I read it? The two women looked at each other, curious and touched. Dear Mom and dear Dr. Maria, Daniel began, his voice clear and strong. Before, I felt like I was locked inside a glass cage. I could see everything, but nobody could hear me. Dr. Maria didn't break the cage. She showed me that there never was a cage. And Mom, thank you for letting her teach me that I was always perfect exactly as I am. Elizabeth couldn't stop her tears. Neither could Maria. 3 months later, Maria stood on the main stage at the International Special Education Conference, speaking to 6,000 educators from around the world. Daniel, now 9 years old, stood beside her as co-presenter. My name is Daniel Carter, he said into the microphone, his voice filling the huge auditorium. 1 year ago, doctors said I would never speak normally. Today, I speak 9 languages because a woman believed I had a voice from the very first day. She just needed to teach me how to use it. The entire audience stood up and clapped. Elizabeth, watching from the front row, looked around and saw tears in the eyes of hundreds of teachers, parents, and therapists. Here was living proof that calling a child limited is often the biggest limitation we can place on them. When Maria took the microphone, her voice was steady and strong. 1 year ago, I was invisible in our society. Today, I'm here not because I changed, but because someone finally decided to see me. The same thing happened with Daniel. He always had this ability. I just created the safe environment for it to bloom. After the presentation, a reporter asked, Dr. Rodriguez, when did you know Daniel was special? Maria smiled, placing her hand on the boy's shoulder. The first day, he looked into my eyes. All children are special. Some just need different ways to show their magic. Today, 2 years later, the Daniel and Maria Foundation has transformed the lives of over 12,000 children across the country. Elizabeth has become a passionate voice for inclusive education. And Maria has proven that sometimes the greatest response to prejudice isn't destroying those who underestimate us, but building something so beautiful and powerful that they have no choice but to recognize our worth. If this story of overcoming obstacles and finding recognition touched your heart, remember that a person's true value can never be measured by the color of their skin, the clothes they wear, or the job they do, but by the difference they make in the lives of others.